Beaten, broken, and by all means dead. Everything had gone wrong. I laid in a pool of my own blood, basking in the radiating spears of an unforgiving sun. The earth curled around me like a natural coffin, and my lungs lugged like an engine ready to give out. I breathed what I thought were my last breaths. Muzzle flashes occupied my closing eyes. I relived the moments of my downfall. From a respected man on a simple vacation with his wife, to a newly widow dying alone in the desert, all in a day. My mind reeled at the horror. My body opened up to death, and my soul was everything but gone. And yet, the aching of my heart staved off the starving grasp of death. The water from my tears reflected the burn of the sun. My pain started to become my power. I stood, covered in my own dried velvet life, and I felt the wound in my torso. It should have killed me, but that thought had already haunted me for long enough, and now I had to walk. Before the earth was no longer land, but a field, a place for my eyes to lay the pieces that had already begun falling from the sky. I saw around me not directions, but avenues, paths all leading to the same thing, my revenge. Tragedy removes sleep from someone's life. It would be improper to split the following time into days or weeks. It was more of a ruthless stupor, a rush as the building edifice of horror inside of my mind manifested itself into a completely new human. I became the desert landscape. I moved from town to town, blew in under the door like choking dust, and extracted info from the land like the sun does water. 3 young men. Criminals. I had started to form profiles of them. I even knew one name. One goes by Dan. The store clerk could see the disconnect in my eyes. He could see the absolute emptiness that existed inside of me, and what was starting to fill its punishing void. Not seen men like that. I rubbed my hand across his dusty counter, watching as the yellow starch built up under my nails and formed a hardened dam. He leaned in and spoke low. "Son, you don't look so good." I hadn't changed clothes since the incident. The sharp red stains of blood on my shirt had faded into a distant maroon, and the bullet hole still displaying a gaping injury, trying desperately to heal. "I think they live here." I had tracked them quickly. They weren't the type of men to worry themselves about being discreet. And I think you know that. I think you know who I'm talking about. The man shifted on his feet. I don't think you're here to do anything good with those boys," he stuttered, as he tried to make sense of the situation. "We don't want any trouble in this town, and you seem to be looking for it." "I'm not looking for trouble." I leveled my glare at the man, letting the dry honesty seep from my eyes and fill the room. "I'm looking to kill those men, and it won't be no trouble." He gasped as he brought his hands in. "I don't know what those boys did to you, but murdered my wife. They murdered my wife." I was getting tired, and my abrupt nature had cut the man's tongue. "One more time. Where?" He fell back behind his own shoulders, refusing to look me in the eyes and uneasy. Slowly he asked, "Are you truly a killing type of man?" I set my jaw forward, speaking like each word was an order from God. I never was a killer. I barely knew how to handle a gun, and had hardly hurt anything before. But when I was laying on that desert ground, desperate and rattling from blood in my lungs, and bullet in my chest from those boys, something happened. I grasped at my chest, feeling the light fade from my eyes, and muttering my dead wife's name. The tendons in my arms and legs pulling me apart like snapping taut strings. Then, in one brutal, almost elegant moment, I breathed out, expelling what felt like my very last piece of air, and laid back. And I felt bliss. I reached my hand across the counter, and grabbed the edge closest to him. I am not a killing man. Your boys did the service of removing the humanity in me. Now, I'm just a simple killer. They lived in something like a shed, positioned right outside of a canyon ledge and perfectly remote. Perfectly isolated for a gang of young murderers. I had stolen a revolver 3 days earlier, and as I approached their flimsy wooden door, I gripped it tight. Humans talk. People conversate, so that wasn't necessary here. What was about to happen was a meeting between killers, and I was going to speak the only common language left between us. I kicked the door open, calm and without even as much as a hiccup in my heart rate. 2 sat on the couch, and as one stood up I shot 2 rounds into him, missing the first and smashing the other into his neck. He fell with a gargled scream, right as the other ducked and flew into the right-hand wall, reaching clumsily at his belt for a gun. I dumped another 2 into him, hitting his crouching knee and right hip. But before I could finish him off, another man walked in, his own gun in hand and firing with desperate, wild shots. I smashed into a bathroom door to my left, catching shots in my shoulder and arm as I did. I could hear their laboured breathing from behind the wall. I could feel the desperate, worried sweat begin to bud above their brows. Before another second of peace could occur, I jumped back out. I ran to the opposing wall, firing at the 3rd man as I moved. He shot more in my direction, missing most, but planting one burning piece of lead square into my stomach. As I hit the ground, I saw he had done the same, only he had a split skull from my failing shot. As I hit the ground, I saw he had done the same, only he had a split skull from my falling shot. When I hit the ground, I immediately made eye contact with the 2nd man I'd shot. His entire lower body was covered in blood, and his gun didn't appear to be working. I raised mine to shoot, but it merely made the weak sound of an empty click. I was out of ammo. It was a breathless moment. Both of us, mortally wounded and staring at each other. The 1st man had already choked on his own blood, and the 2nd had decorated the walls with his brains, so it was just me and him. One killer to another, resting in the suspended tension of a fight about to crescendo. I screamed as I stood, blood pouring from my stomach like red, sticky vines. I jumped atop of him with a swinging fist, and he found my face with his clawing hands. We traded swings and rolled around the horribly bloody room, tearing and biting at one another, screaming and grunting. Each hand I planted in him squished his face in further, and every shot landed on me poured blood out from my stomach even faster. Eventually, I came back on top, my hands around his neck and my face inches from his. I leaned in closer, almost nose to nose, and I screamed with everything I had. My face went numb, and I could feel the cold chill of blood loss, but I kept myself in front of him, yelling like some sort of animal. He clawed at everything he could, but I would not budge. I let him rip at my eyelids and hook at my lips, but I stayed. I stayed and screamed. I stayed and watched the life leave his eyes, and I let the last sound he heard be primal rage. I stood up. I stood over his dead body and watched it shake as his muscles rebelled at death. Then I looked around. All of it. The velvet chaos of my own doing. All of it was over. The house are now nothing more than a painting. A canvas with its wet medium, only starting to dry. I walked over towards their couch and sat down. My fingers moved slowly over one another, and for one blinking moment, one infinitesimally small second, I became human again. The rushing warmth of life hit my cheeks, and I said her name. "I'm sorry, Claire." I leaned my head back towards the ceiling. "I won't be joining you up there." I closed my eyes, knowing that only humans go to heaven, but knowing that I might have saved just a few more from coming too soon. And perhaps better yet, I brought murderers to hell with me.